informing the production and writing of this book as a model of honest exchange and collaborative work between the author and Nahua intellectuals, distancing itself from any extractivist mode of knowledge production. The immersion in both the language and culture informing Nahua's world vision serves as a mirror set upon Western rational forms of understanding and inhabiting the natural world, and provide us with alternative conceptions of social relationality, environmental engagement, and cultural preservation. The committee also recognizes the University of Arizona Press for its work with design, layout, and color in the production of the book. Thanks to that design, the author's recognition of Nahua scientists, scholars, and artists is clearly highlighted and emphasized, and the liveness of her materials is strongly conveyed to its readers. The committee also extended 2 honorable mentions. The first one goes to Portable Post-Socialisms, New Cuban Mediascapes After the End of History, written by Paloma Duong and published by University of Texas Press. The committee commends the author on the writing of a remarkable first book that navigates a complex and hard-to-decode Cuban post-socialist present through an interdisciplinary lens that highlights a multimedia archive. The book's exemplary methodology provides a model for how to engage contemporary cultural landscapes across a diversity of media ecosystems, balancing attention and form with the politics of art and representation. And the second mention was for Subterranean Matters, Corporate Mining and Resource Nationalism in Plurinational Bolivia, written by Andrea Marsden and published by Duke University Press. The committee commends the author in producing an impressive ethnography of Bolivian mining cooperatives and the subterranean spaces they occupy, weaving together the analysis of this underground extractivist practice with forms of embodiment and sedimented history of the miners. The author puts into dialogue modes of theorization she found in and brought in, and makes a key intervention in 3-dimensional spaces and natural resources in Latin America and beyond. Marston enlightens the question of plurinational politics from below, complementing existing studies in contemporary Bolivia with a rigorous approach to the material forms of organization and territory that define cooperative politics. Thank you very much. Congratulations, and we're gonna, soon after the announcements of the second prize, listen from the authors themselves.
Hola, buenas tardes. Bueno, es un enorme placer para mí. Yo soy chair del Premio Iberoamericano de 2025. El premio fue otorgado a partir de un comité de 5 personas. Quiero mencionar a mis colegas y agradecer la participación en este trabajo de evaluación. Gisela Sarenberg, Antonio Stecher Guzmán, Bridget Arce y Gina Saraceni. Voy a leer nuestro dictamen. El premio fue otorgado a la autora Bethsabé Huamán Andía, aquí presente, que posteriormente va a hablar de su libro. El título del libro es Hijas del Horror, Rocío Silva Santiesteban y Regina José Galindo, Mujer, Testimonio y Violencia en la Poesía y Performance. Andía's book, selected by the Premio Iberoamericano 2025 Prize Committee, deals with the representation of sexual violence through the voice of women in the poetry collection Las Hijas del Horror, del Terror by Rocío Silva Santisteban, and in 2 performances by Regina José Galindo, Mientras ellos siguen libres and La Verdad. These works use as discursive tools the testimonies given after the internal armed conflicts in Peru and Guatemala, respectively, in which the poetic voice and the performance body take on the function of bearing witness to the sexual violence suffered by indigenous women. The committee praised the originality of the book, which develops the feminine utterance in both poetry and performance, from the incarnated listening to the testimonies of women who were victims of rape in the internal armed conflicts that devastated the region in the last century. This relationship between writing and oral histories highlights the testimony as a privileged tool for poetic and performative exploration, identifying poetic and performative languages as uniquely effective spaces for the cultural translation of a female voice. The book thus extends the pact of truthfulness on which testimony is based to poetry and performance, both acquiring a great elocutionary intensity and force. Huamán and Andía argues that the transtextual relationship between testimony and work of art turns the individual voice into a collective one, and the individual body into a collective body, and immerses the reader, spectator, in a dramatic experience with the aim of assuming the woman's point of view and provoking identification and solidarity with her struggles. The committee found that the great value of Hijas del Horror lies in its interdisciplinary approach, the consideration of 2 countries, the intersection of gender, literary, and artistic studies, and the ethical political value of recovering and making visible a historical experience of brutal violation of women's human rights. El comité también otorgó una mención a el texto ¿Qué tienen los piqueteros en la cabeza?, de Marcos Pérez, también presente aquí. Felicitaciones a ambos. Y voy a leer también nuestro dictamen sobre este texto tan valioso. ¿Qué tienen los piqueteros en la cabeza? Is an original and nuanced case study based on ethnographic fieldwork on the piquetero movement in Argentina. It explores how workers affected by the industrialization and job loss engage in grassroots mobilization. The committee found the book to be a persuasive contribution to understanding one of the most important actors in popular politics in Argentina. Moreover, the book engages in a broad dialogue with discussions currently focused on pressing social problems that are being addressed by several disciplines in the social sciences regarding the structures of social struggle in context of profound destructions of the state and the public sphere, or the way organizational capacity, activist support, and the rootedness of repertoires of actions are maintained in context of growing autocracy. Furthermore, the text explores the presence of progressive and conservative elements in popular organizations in the context of conservative and gender reactions that have become increasingly prevalent in these sectors. The treatment of elements that are both traditional and progressive within the social movement in question, as outlined in Marcos Pérez's book, opens up a whole new field for new lines of research on social movements that do not fall into sterile reifications or reductionism. Our committee believes that this book deserves an honorable mention in this award because of its rigorous approach to research, which avoids both idealizations of social struggle and radical stigmatization of it. This makes it possible to include useful considerations based on gender and intergenerational perspective, which are also a valuable legacy for research in these and other fields related to the intersections between collective action, contentious actions, the world of war, the destruction of the states, labor market transformations, conservative and progressivism. Muchas gracias, y ahora entonces pasa Kelly, ¿no?, a presentar su libro.
We're like a well-oiled machine here. I can put up a PowerPoint that was here but now is no longer here? Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you. First, I want to thank the Bryce Wood Book Award Committee, Diana, Alejandra, and your long-suffering work this past year. I was, of course, very honored, in fact, shocked to receive this award, but even more so when I was reading through who was on that committee and to receive the support of such an amazing list of scholars was really touching. So thank you very much, and really great to be with some other women and men that are doing great work. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about my book. I'm gonna do just a short install today of key terms, guiding principles, and then outline the major threads and arguments within each chapter. So since the book is about Nahua science and technology, I wanted to real quickly be clear that who Nahuas are. They're native speakers of the Nahuatl language. This was the common language of the Aztec Empire, but there are at least 2 million people that still speak it today as their first language. So as for science, I subscribe to feminist science studies scholar Sandra Harding. That is the best tongue twister, Sandra Harding. Her definition of science, which is any and every culture's institutions and systematic empirical and theoretical practices of coming to understand how the world around us works. That's a capacious definition, but I think also it surprisingly, I talked about this book at the History of Science Studies conference, and most people were like, yeah, I can get on board with that. I can go with that. So I spent a lot of time talking to Nahuas about what would be the closest approximation, because in the Nahuatl language, they didn't have exactly that term science or ciencia. And what we came up with was yehekolisli, and so it means a practice, experience, and or interaction with someone or something, and that can be in the past, present, or future. And what I really liked about this term yehekolisli is that it reflects how Nahua science is both experiential, but it's also ancestral. So it's coming from somebody's experience now, today, but also past and inherited knowledge. Technology, my thinking is along the lines of anthropologist Alfred Gell, and then more recently historian Marcy Norton's proposals that technologies are systems. And so really that's about, rather than the thing, we tend to think of technology as a tool or a thing that we're using, but it's really looking behind the curtain and thinking about technology as a total sum. So it's people creating, it's about all that goes into creating the thing, building upon and sharing materials, tools, knowledges, and practices, and they do it in order to meet specific needs. In Nahuatl, we came up with this term that I absolutely love, and it makes so much sense, tlachichihualisli, something one uses to make something else. And that's also pretty capacious, but it has lots of practical applications in Nahuatl culture. I followed 3 guiding principles when researching this book, and I actually had these taped up in front of my computer. 1, all cultures have science and technology. 2, the West should not be the universal starting point for thinking about the sciences and technologies of other cultures. And 3, indigenous adoption and adaptation of ideas and practices of other cultures does not make indigenous people less or no longer indigenous. In the same way that when Spaniards adopted and adapted indigenous ideas and practices when they arrived to Mexico, they were not deemed any less Spanish. So I wanted to make that clear, that indigenous people can continue to be indigenous, yet change. So those are my key terms and the guiding principles, and I will jump in. So the problem that I was trying to look at with the book is that scholars have done incredible work in history of science and technologies in the Iberian world, but we really lack a comprehensive idea of indigenous contribution to those histories. It's pretty rare that we hear the terms indigenous and then science and technology together. They tend to be thought of, science and technology are thought to be the purview of the West, while practice, or maybe habitus, which both signal lacking intentionality, are thought to belong to the rest. Over the past 500 years in what we today call Mexico, indigenous peoples have regularly been represented as inferior, mentally, physically, and spiritually, to justify colonial extractivism, whether resources, labor, or land. If indigenous science and technology are acknowledged at all in Mexico, they're usually framed as unrecoverable or irreparably damaged pre-invasion traditions, relics confined to a static past. So in the book, I'm trying to work against these erroneous and racialized discourses that present Nahuas as uninterested or incapable of scientific thought and technological innovation. I do this through a series of pre-invasion and colonial period case studies, but primarily emphasizing the 16th century, which was the first century of Spanish and indigenous contact. To tether the past to the present, although I'm not trying to do a comparative tethering of any kind, I stitched the chapters together with brief interludes highlighting Nahua artists, physicists, activists, farmers, historians, poets, and weavers with whom I've been discussing Nahua science and technology for quite some time. I've learned just as much, if not more, from them than scholarly books and articles. So in the book, I draw from theories and methods of multiple fields and disciplines to assess what a colleague of mine called an eclectic range of sources, which I thought was a very fun way to put it. These were largely produced by Nahuas. They're written in Nahua, Spanish, and Latin. They're also pictographic. So these include encyclopedias, bureaucratic surveys, pictographic codices, ceremonial activity, petitions, oral histories, and cartographic narratives, to name a few. So within these materials, I'm analyzing how Nahuas understood their relationship with other than humans, how they conceived of health, illness, and healing, how they created water-related infrastructures and resource management systems, how they deployed alphabetic writing in multiple languages, and how they mapped their territories with oral, embodied, and written narrative. So in the first chapter, I outline Nahua principles, methods, and rationales of investigation related to the world around them through an analysis of Book 11 of the Florentine Codex, the only extant colonial period Nahua natural history produced by Nahuas. With this analysis, I show that pre-invasion and colonial Nahua science was based on a blend of empirical and ancestral knowledges. I probe this embodied relationality with a plunge into the Nahua sensorium, the combined array of sensory faculties, and I also examined the way Nahua science was concerned with predicting and influencing future outcomes, along with modeling an ethical framework that would ensure that Nahuas survived and thrived in an interconnected world. So I linked this chapter, oh, I went too fast. I linked this chapter to contemporary Nahua painter Norma Martinez, whose work you can see, she allowed me to use this beautiful painting of hers in the book. All of her work really emphasizes relationality and human, other than human relationships. And then also with Nahua physicist, Abraham de la Cruz. He specializes in nanotechnology. He's always said, I have two laboratories. One is in the Milpa, one is at the university. And it was really important for me to highlight Abraham's work as well, so that folks understood that Nahua people are also in Western laboratories as well. So in the second chapter, I explore the visibility of indigenous herbal medicines in colonial archival materials, and the invisibility of the people who prepared and applied them, the tools they used, and where and with whom these knowledges were exchanged. I address methodological challenges and possibilities when dealing with silences in the archive through a reconstruction of indigenous health, illness, and healing at the end of the 16th century, drawn from the Relaciones Geográficas corpus of colonial Mexico. This chapter shows that despite some 50 years of coexisting with Europeans, many Nahuas yet maintained Nahua-specific ways of comprehending the human body and how the world worked. In the third chapter, I show how water has shaped and been shaped by Nahua's social, economic, political, and epistemological worlds. Conjugating various colonial pictographic and alphabetic sources, I begin by addressing how water-related technologies, including dikes, causeways, chinampas, so the raised lake bed farming, canals, and bridges were intimately related to elite indigenous bids to achieve power and or to maintain it. And I think you can kind of see on the bottom part where there are two different, there's like a blue and there's like a green color, and then there's a brown line that's separating that. And that's the dike slash causeway that was completed in 1450. It's called the Nezahualcóyotl dike, and it was about 15 kilometers long and 8 meters wide. So after talking about mostly about infrastructure, Dan, and really influenced by the work that Dan Nemser has done, I then shift to focusing on water and the sacred with a reframing of Nahua ceremonial rain petitions as a reliable water management technology. And I link the chapter on herbal medicine and water relations to Nahua historian and Chinampero, Baruch Martinez of Tláhuac, this southern borough of Mexico City. Baruch is a language activist and fierce protector of the endangered Chinampa environment in the Central Valley of Mexico. In the fourth chapter, I pivot to communicative technologies to demonstrate that the Roman alphabet and European languages, often considered colonial impositions, were instead technologies rapidly adopted and adapted by Nahuas to defend and improve their positions in the colonial order. Indeed, they deployed alphabetic writing in a variety of languages, not only to advocate for themselves, but also to record their histories, and at times, simply to play with words. A focus on 16th century Spanish, Latin, and Nahuatl diplomatic letters written by Nahua noblemen to the King of Spain illuminates the key strategies and discourses Nahuas utilized to support their bids for recognition, compensation, and rights. And this particular letter is written in Latin, and it's the only one that I've found so far in the AGI that has female signatories. You can see on the bottom right and then the far left, there are female signatories, and this has to do with how Nahua noblemen optimized their lineages, really understood the idea that Spaniards had about blood purity and what that meant, and they were playing with that. I link this chapter to Nahua poet Gustavo Zapoteco Cedeño, who in 2019 published a book of poems in Nahuatl with translation to English and to Polish, circumventing Spanish altogether. With this book, he aims to emphasize that the Nahuatl language and its poets are more than capable of transcending national borders and languages. In the fifth and the final chapter, I discuss creative and strategic 17th and 18th century Nahua responses to forced removal, concentrated resettlement, and both indigenous and settler encroachment of their territories. With close attention to Nahua documentation of their oral histories and embodied mappings of relationships with lands, peoples, and deities since time immemorial, I illustrate how storytelling was a crucial tool to negotiate ongoing dispossession. Primordial titles, as these manuscripts have come to be called in contemporary scholarship, reminded Nahuas and proved to outsiders that they had a past on those lands and deserved a future there as well. On the screen, we have Iquique Weaver, Flor Hernandez Villegas. She's co-founder of the Grupo Contraviento a Toltecayotl, a Nahua cultural group and weaving collective in Milpa Alta, another southern borough of Mexico City. During the pandemic, Flor met regularly with a group of local weavers who she had been teaching before in person on Zoom to create what she called textigramas, or textilegrams, collaboratively documenting their sentipensar at this extraordinary time. And you can see one of the textigramas on the bottom, and on the far left there, hopefully you can see an image of a small girl. And this particular weaver almost lost her 9-year-old daughter to COVID, and so this was a way for her to document and really work through that process. The 5 chapters and contemporary interludes show that Nahuas valued both tradition and innovation. They learned from the past and were also forward-thinking. Contact with other cultures certainly brought change, but Nahuas were not irrevocably severed from pre-invasion beliefs about their bodies, the lands they inhabited, or their gods, nor had they discarded time-worn methods of transmitting these beliefs. They were not blinded by superstition, as Europeans often portrayed them, and they certainly were not averse to change. Instead, Nahuas, both past and present, have always made calculated decisions to ensure their futures. I want to clarify that this book is not just about filling gaps in the scholarly literature. I hope that it contributes meaningfully to Nahua people, particularly the younger generation. To that end, the book is in the process of being translated to Spanish and to Nahuatl. The Nahuatl version will be the first academic monograph in Mexico translated to one of the country's 68 indigenous languages. My intent for this book is to render a Nahua-centric story that can stand on its own, a story unequivocally and unapologetically focused on indigenous ways of knowing and indigenous dynamic innovation. That said, I hope it is one that can eventually be woven into the histories of pre-invasion, colonial, and contemporary science and technology in the Americas, histories from which indigenous peoples are egregiously absent. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Gracias al jurado del Premio Iberoamericano y a sus amables palabras sobre este libro, y también gracias a todas, todos, todes los que están aquí presentes y los que nos acompañan online. Voy a hablar, del libro Hijas del Horror, Rocío Silva Santisteban y Regina José Galindo, Mujer, Testimonio y Violencia en la Poesía y la Performance. Tengo que empezar agradeciendo. ¿Aquí? Ok. Sí, gracias. Bueno, voy a empezar un poco agradeciendo y contándoles como el detrás de cámaras de este libro, una serie de situaciones que lo hicieron posible y que ahora que recibí este premio realmente es una gran alegría para mí. Bueno, primero este texto empezó siendo parte de mi tesis para el doctorado en Tulane, y tuve la suerte de el último año en el que estaba en la escuela graduada, se creó una beca para que ya no tuviéramos que dictar clases y pudiéramos dedicarnos solamente a hacer la investigación. Eso se inauguró el año que a mí me tocaba hacerlo, o sea que fue la primera generación que tuvo ese privilegio, el cual obviamente sirvió muchísimo, como muchos aquí presentes lo saben. También a través de los fondos de la universidad pude ir a Guatemala y conocer personalmente a Regina José Galindo, que es una de las autoras que analizo en el libro. Ella fue muy generosa conmigo y realmente fue muy importante también conocerla y saber un poco más de su trabajo de manera de primera mano, digamos, ¿no? La otra autora que está incluida en el libro, Rocío Silva Santisteban. Sí. Ok.
Así, y entonces ya te ven la cara.
Bien. La segunda autora, Rocío Silva Santisteban, es una poeta activista, académica, peruana que he tenido el placer de conocer hace ya mucho tiempo, y de hecho mi tesis de maestría también analizó otros de sus textos poéticos. En Entonces, ahí es más bien una continuidad, ¿no? Es una continuidad en mis análisis e investigación. Otra cosa de que me siento muy honrada y que ocurrió con este libro es que Hipatia Ediciones se interesó por este libro. Hipatia Ediciones es una editorial realmente reciente, creada por exalumnas de la Universidad de San Marcos de Lima, que es la universidad pública de la que yo también me gradué. Y entonces para mí es un gran orgullo que ellas hayan querido empezar una línea académica con este libro. Hipatia Ediciones además es una editorial que solo publica a mujeres y que solo difunde a las autoras peruanas, latinoamericanas, y entonces doblemente honrada en ese sentido. Lamentablemente, por esas mismas razones, Hipatia no está aquí presente en la exhibición de libros, pero los libros se venden online. Y entonces, igual, y si mi libro no está en su campo de estudios, aunque tal vez igual lo sorprenda si le dan el chance de leerlo, pero igual se publica poesía, narrativa, otros textos críticos, entonces vayan y exploren la página y van a encontrar a nuevas escritoras, ¿no?, que están surgiendo en este momento. La verdad, títulos muy interesantes, ediciones muy cuidadas. De hecho, a ella se debe el texto, el hecho de que este texto se transformó, ¿no?, de una tesis muy aburrida académica a un texto que creo modestamente que es agradable de leer, ¿no? Y bueno, y finalmente a LASA por haberle otorgado este premio. También agradecida porque este es el segundo premio que recibe este libro. También recibió un premio de los estudios de género porque es un libro que también aborda la perspectiva de género. ¿De qué trata este libro? Bueno, básicamente este libro trata de la representación de la violencia sexual y esto surge como mujer y como autora, yo también, lectora, docente, pero aficionada a las artes, al cine, a los libros. He estado muchas veces enfrentada a representaciones de la violencia sexual que me han parecido no solo negativas, sino contraproducentes respecto del mensaje que querían transmitir, y eso siempre me ha hecho sentir mal, ¿no? Me ha hecho sentir victimizada, atemorizada, ¿no? Entonces esa ha sido una preocupación constante en mi vida, ¿no?, que he podido trasladar al mundo académico, y entonces me interesaba sobre todo buscar representaciones de la violencia sexual en el arte que yo consideraba que eran respetuosas, ¿no?, de la situación y que sobre todo eran diferentes del tipo de representación que vemos constantemente en nuestra sociedad, que es una representación que valida esa violencia y que victimiza a las mujeres, ¿no?, por una violencia que se ha cometido contra ellas, ¿no? Ese es el default, digamos, de lo que existe en nuestra sociedad, ¿no? Entonces, yo estaba específicamente buscando textos que hubieran logrado sobrepasar esa valla y tuvieran otra manera de enfrentarse a este problema. Entonces, en ese sentido, este texto logra abrir espacios de enunciación sobre la violencia sexual desde el punto de vista de las mujeres, y eso es lo que lo diferencia de otras aproximaciones a la violencia sexual, porque desde el punto de vista de las mujeres no hay duda de que se trata de un crimen, no hay duda de que ha habido violencia, ha habido una relación de poder que ha generado, ¿no?, la situación de abuso. Cuando hay duda es porque esa historia, esa narración, esa enunciación no fue hecha desde el punto de vista de las mujeres, ¿no?, de las que lo sufrieron. Entonces, este libro es un análisis comparativo entre Guatemala y Perú, básicamente las autoras que he mencionado, Rocío Silva Santisteban y Regina José Galindo, y me centro en sus obras, ¿no?, en el arte, porque pienso que el arte es un vehículo de comprensión y acercamiento a la realidad. Y también aquí, el libro anterior también menciona algunas obras de arte, ¿no? Yo creo que el arte cumple un rol fundamental en nuestra sociedad, ¿no? Y en el caso particular del tema de la guerra interna que ocurrió en el Perú por 20 años. Ahí yo tengo una relación íntima, ¿no?, con esa situación por ser peruana, que ocurrió además cuando yo estaba creciendo, ¿no? Entonces, por mucho tiempo, y creo que muchas personas en mi país quisieron no saber, ¿no?, no enterarse, no querer saber qué había pasado en esos años, porque era doloroso, porque era triste, ¿no? Eso, ¿no? La guerra, creo que es una reacción normal, ¿no? Tratar de evitar esos espacios que nos hacen sufrir, que nos hacen sentir mal. Y en algún momento me di cuenta que no podía seguir de espaldas a algo tan importante que había ocurrido, ¿no? Y entonces el arte, en este caso, el libro, el poemario de Rocío, y Hijas del Terror, me permitió navegar esa situación y leer el informe de la comisión y enterarme de lo que había pasado y claramente oponerme y también tratar de contribuir con mi grano de arena para que se haga justicia por todas las atrocidades que ocurrieron y especialmente porque esa guerra afectó principalmente a los colectivos indígenas del país, ¿no? Y particularmente se ensañó con las mujeres, ¿no?, que además fueron las que sobrevivieron, en gran parte las únicas sobrevivientes. En ese sentido, también creo que la memoria y la justicia son claves para nuestra sociedad, no solo por las guerras concretas, sino también por toda esta tergiversación que ha habido, ¿no?, de estos 500 o más años de colonización, que también tiene que ver con algo que se había mencionado, ¿no?, con el conocimiento. ¿Qué entendemos por conocimiento, no? Yo creo que realmente la clave de nuestra posibilidad de seguir existiendo en este planeta está en las cosmovisiones indígenas, y si no fuera porque ellos, a pesar de toda la violencia que han recibido, han mantenido, ¿no?, sus saberes, sus conocimientos, a pesar de haber sido perseguidos, asesinados, ¿no?, a pesar de habérseles dicho que todo lo que ellos pensaban, creían, sentían estaba mal, estaba errado, ¿no? A pesar de eso, no ha subsistido, ¿no? Yo creo que ahí reside, ¿no?, nuestra posibilidad como humanidad, como mundo, como sociedad, de poder resolver los problemas que estamos enfrentando en el presente. Bueno, el libro está organizado en 5 capítulos. El primer capítulo es este contexto histórico centrado, ¿no?, en las 2 guerras que ocurrieron en Perú. La guerra interna duró 20 años, en Guatemala 36. En ambos casos hay un montón de situaciones similares. También los grupos indígenas fueron los más golpeados durante la guerra en Guatemala, igual que en Perú. También hay similitudes en los procesos de verdad, ¿no? Guatemala fue pionera al tratar de buscar respuestas específicamente a la violencia que habían recibido las mujeres, y de hecho Perú siguió ese ejemplo, ¿no? Hubo varios vínculos entre las comisiones de Perú y de Guatemala en esa misma línea, ¿no? Entonces es básicamente un recorrido histórico de ambos eventos, basado o centrándose justamente en el tema de las mujeres, ¿no? Luego viene el marco teórico para entender esta violencia que ocurre entre la mujer. ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué a las mujeres? ¿Por qué a las mujeres indígenas? ¿Y por qué específicamente la violencia sexual, ¿no? De ahí vienen los análisis a profundidad, ¿no?, de Las Hijas del Terror, del poemario de Rocío, y luego de las 2 obras de performance, La Verdad y Mientras ellos siguen libres. En La Verdad es una performance en la que Regina José Galindo, por 1 hora y 15 minutos más o menos, lee partes de los testimonios que se dieron a la Comisión del Esclarecimiento Histórico, y cada 5 o 10 minutos una persona, un dentista, viene y le inyecta anestesia en la boca, ¿no? Entonces, poco a poco su voz se va haciendo ininteligible, ¿no? De pronto ya no se entiende lo que está diciendo, ¿no? Como una clara metáfora de querer callar esas voces, esas historias, ¿no? Bueno, entonces analizo esa performance. Y en la otra, Mientras ellos siguen libres, es una performance en la que ella realiza cuando está con 8 meses de embarazo. Y entonces ella reproduce, basada en los testimonios de las mujeres indígenas, reproduce las maneras en que habían sido abusadas sexualmente cuando estaban en altos grados de embarazo, y producto de esas violaciones ellas o quedan infértiles y pierden esos embarazos, ¿no? Entonces eran claras formas no solo de violencia, de tortura, de sufrimiento a las mujeres indígenas, y un claro mensaje contra la vida, ¿no? Contra la posibilidad de continuidad de estas culturas, ¿no? Entonces, el último capítulo un poco que recoge todas estos elementos, ¿no? Estas piezas de rompecabezas, para plantear el testimonio como una herramienta discursiva del arte de la memoria, ¿no? Lo que conecta estas obras y estas representaciones de la violencia es justamente que están basadas en testimonios reales, ¿no? Vertidos en las comisiones de la verdad, y que entonces mi análisis invita a pensar que eso ayuda a que el lector no pueda crear ese espacio de la duda en la que esta violencia sexual usualmente se lleva, ¿no? Eso de que, pero tal vez, pero ¿y dónde estaba? ¿Y cómo? No. O sea, esa relación con el testimonio, en mi análisis, ¿no? Que claro, desarrollo un poco más complejamente, pero lo central sería eso, ¿no? Que ese link, ese enlace es la que permite una lectura y una interpretación diferente. Algunos otros puntos claves de este libro son que es el primer estudio comparativo entre Rocío Silva Santisteban y Regina José Galindo, y esto por algo absolutamente fortuito. Cuando estuve haciendo mi maestría en Nueva York, llevé un curso sobre performance latinoamericano que cambió mi vida, fue realmente un maravilloso curso, y ahí fue cuando conocí por primera vez la obra de Regina José Galindo, que me impactó muchísimo, y a raíz de eso, ¿no? Es que continuó una labor de investigación, ¿no? Además, este libro es parte de un proyecto más grande, ¿no? Sobre cómo representar la violencia sexual de maneras que sean armónicas y respetuosas de las mujeres, y que realmente puedan lograr un cambio en nuestra sociedad. Y ahí ya en ese proyecto más grande, pues ya quiero no solo expandir de la poesía y la performance, sino también la narrativa, el film, las películas, y también las artesanías, ¿no? Porque las mujeres indígenas tal vez no necesariamente tienen acceso a películas o a libros, ¿no? Pero sí a su manera de desarrollar su arte en los textiles, en las cerámicas, ¿no? Entonces creo que ahí también hay una importante fuente para analizar estos temas que me gustaría abordar. Bueno, también es un análisis de género, como he mencionado, por el cual fue premiado, y también, como se dijo en el dictamen, es un texto absolutamente y en todos sus niveles interdisciplinario, ¿no? Bueno, eso era lo que quería decir básicamente. Muchas gracias a todos, todas.
Javier Uriarte está conectado online. Adelante, ¿sí? Pero si podíamos hacer que pudiese. Adelante.
¿Que hable Javier?
No, perdón. Bueno, que lo consiga.
Bueno, buenos días o tardes. Es un placer estar aquí como editora en jefe de la revista Latin American Research Review. Es un honor para mí presentar este premio al mejor artículo de LARR, que es también patrocinado por la Universidad de Florida. Y el premio este año ha ido a Denisa Jashari por el artículo The Chilean Christians for Socialism, Movement Liberationist, Third Worldist and Utopian. Es un artículo realmente interesante, se lee muy bien escrito, parte de las razones por las que le han dado el premio al comité. También un artículo muy bien investigado, usando distintos tipos de archivos personales, archivos también libros publicados de testimonios, una variedad de fuentes muy interesantes, y también señalando algo muy importante, que es la relación entre la política progresista o de izquierdas y la religión en América Latina. Entonces, voy a darle la palabra a Javier Uriarte, que fue el chair del comité que decidió el premio, para que explique cuál fue las razones por las que el comité decidió esto. Muchas gracias. ¿Le pueden poner ustedes? Yo no sé qué hacer.
Me, first of all, is everything okay? Okay, 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 ahora estoy grande. Okay, genial. Bueno, es una pena no poder estar ahí, antes que nada, en primer lugar, me da tristeza no poder estar, y me da tristeza ser el único de este panel que está eh, online aquí. Así que bueno, es una pena que no poder estar con amigos y colegas tan queridos. Okay. First of all, I want to thank LASA for inviting me to be the chair of this very exciting committee. And it was really a pleasure and a discovery to read all of the submissions and learn so much from them. I want to acknowledge here the extraordinary work of the two other members of the committee, Heather Brana and Rebecca Belmartin. I also learned a lot from them in our exchanges regarding this prize. They have done extraordinary work. And we decided to give the prize, as was said before, to Denisa Jashari's The Chilean Christians of Socialist Movement, Liberationist, Third Worldist, and Utopian. And I will read now a text that actually was prepared by my colleagues in the committee based on the notes that of our discussions. Denisa Jashari's The Chilean Christians for Socialist Movement, Liberationist, Third Worldist, and Utopian makes a significant contribution to our understanding of Cold War Latin America. The article uncovers the previously unappreciated role of Chile's Cristianos por el Socialismo in advancing regional and transnational socialist projects by tracing its origins, activities, and influence. The group's unique merging of Marxism and Christianity brought utopian and liberationist ideals together with an anti-capitalist third worldism. Previously undervalued because of its relatively short existence, the article persuasively reveals the Cristianos por el Socialismo regional and transnational impact. The article's use of a range of historical sources, including interviews and personal archives, is laudable. While firmly rooted in historical methodologies and historiographical debates, the article holds interdisciplinary relevance. Sociologists will appreciate the article's discussion of the intersection of religious belief and socioeconomic inequality. Political scientists will benefit from the article's engagement with the church as a political actor. Scholars of religious studies will no doubt appreciate this account of how religious beliefs and principles inform individuals' and communities' interpretation of the complex social, economic, and political dynamics around them. What is more, the article is clearly and accessibly written, so that audiences across disciplines can enjoy and appreciate these insights. And so I congratulate once again Denisa for this very well-deserved prize and this awesome piece of research. I also want to add that the committee decided to give an honorable mention to the article Against Latin America Regionalism, the 1972 Brussels Congress and the Anti-Imperialist League of the Americas, written by Anne Garland Mahler. This article studies the Anti-Imperialist League of the Americas, la Liga Antiimperialista de las Américas, or LADLA, one of the most significant solidarity movements in the history of the American continent. The article focuses on the encounter of LADLA activists with African American, and Asian anti-colonial intellectuals at the 1927 Brussels Congress. Drawing from LADLA's newspaper El Libertador, letters from LADLA leaders, and speeches and resolutions in the League Against Imperialism archive, it studies how the exchanges that began in Brussels influenced debate circles in the Americas. It argues that a closer look at LADLA's participation in the League Against Imperialism shifts the traditional understanding of interwar Latin American regionalist ideologies, showing how LADLA members rejected these ideologies for a hemispheric globalism or an interdependency with anti-imperialist movements in the United States and around the world. The committee was struck by the strength of the arguments put forward, the exceptional clarity of the language, and the compelling structure of this article. The article bids a far more nuanced idea of international solidarity movements in the Americas by decisively situating them in a transnational perspective. Furthermore, this is also a fine piece of interdisciplinary research that can be of interest to people not just working in the field of history, but also in African and Asian studies, forms of global resistance to imperialism and transnational solidarity movements. So congratulations also to Anne Garland Mahler. Now, my understanding is that we are going to listen to Denisa's Jashari's presentation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to say thanks to the committee for engaging with and for recognizing my work. This article grew from a section of a chapter in the dissertation, which feels like a while ago now, itself a tangential foray into a field I had not planned to enter. If we're lucky, serendipitous encounters and archival fragments take us into productive new directions. At first, I thought I would redo the whole article, including the footnotes, but then I decided to spare you. So instead, I am going to focus on one aspect of it for the sake of time. I'd like to highlight one of its arguments, and if there is time at the end, to talk a bit about the archival and oral history work that sustains that and other arguments in the piece. The Chilean road to socialism sparked fervent interest worldwide. The Salvador Allende's Popular Unity Coalition sought to transform the unequal power relations that had long structured Chilean society. These economic transformations via expansive agrarian reform, the nationalization of key industries, the transformation to labor rights, were equally matched by the social and cultural changes enacted by his administration, such as expanded access to housing, health, and education. These are well-known aspects of the Allende era. At the same time, the politicization of everyday life, emblematic of the broader Cold War, has also received plenty of attention. But scholars of Latin America and Europe have recently revised our understanding of the 60s, but moving away from the solely political dimensions of that decade to account for the religious impulses that were shared across the Atlantic. Religion, they have shown, was not marginal to these broader social and cultural shifts. My focus on the Christians for Socialism, or CPS in Chile, contributes to this trend by highlighting the role of Catholic clergy laity in the convergence of the tenets of Marxism and Christianity during the Allende era. I argue that the CPA did so by creatively leveraging the capacious concept of utopia and drawing on intellectual trends of the time, like liberation theology in Latin America and political theology from Europe. The article places the Chilean CPS movement in a hemispheric and transnational vein, which I don't have time to go into now, but you should know that they had a regional impact in Latin America, as evidenced by the first Latin American encounter of Christians for socialism in 1972 in Santiago, and a transnational impact in the formation of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, or ITWAT. This focus on the Christians' for socialism shows an often overlooked component of Allende's Chile, its enduring influence on progressive and left-leaning Catholics. Their embrace of Marxism was polemic and caused rifts, tensions within the church, the hierarchy, and the clergy. The notion of transcendence and the construction of a new man appealed to the utopian aspects of both religious and Marxist thinking. The CPS drew from liberation theology in maintaining an active dialectic between theory and practice, and in suggesting that salvation and social conflicts occur in history, bridging the gap between the temporal and supernatural planes the new Christendom ecclesiology had so rigidly outlined. Conservative Christians and members of the hierarchy of the church try to dismiss them as a Marxist front. An in-depth analysis of documents and oral interviews with them shows that they neither espoused an ahistorical utopia nor a strictly scientific form of Marxism. Utopian elements, or the envisioning of better future, have been a central component in social and religious movements seeking to bring about profound change. But utopia was largely ignored as a concept and discredited following the horrors of Stalinism and Maoism, what Jay Winter calls major utopias or dystopias of the 20th century. And the concept of utopia has recently made a comeback, and but not without contradictions. For Frederick Jameson, the process of envisioning a utopic future creates a critical distance to which to contemplate the limitations of the present. His claim that, quote, utopia emerges at the moment of the suspension of the political suggests an evasion politics. David Harvey, a critical geographer, on the other hand, argues that the danger of this kind of utopia is that it becomes nothing but a pure signifier of hope, destined never to acquire a material referent. An important distinction then emerges between the process of utopia, Jameson's vein, and the content of it. The triumph of the Cuban Revolution made utopia seem reachable. In her analysis of Cesar Eidings, Diana Sorensen argues that by embracing self-sacrifice, discipline, morality, Che, quote, mapped the terms for the definition of the new man in language appropriated from religion, end quote. She further argues that utopia privileges a language of movement and marching, not merely toward a better place, significantly to a superior form of humanity. Thus, the utopian drive implies a radical break with the present to bring about the desired future. But the process of how to get from the present to the future, from here to there, is less clear. In conversations with political theologians, neo-Marxist and liberation theologians, the Christians for Socialism group in Chile engaged in dynamic debates about both the process and the content of utopia. They shared the utopian impulse to realize the kingdom of God here and now, but they often also disagreed on how to make it a reality. The most well-known of liberation theologians, Gustavo Gutierrez, elaborated a very nuanced perspective on utopia. He drew on the work of neo-Marxist philosopher Ernst Bloch, who was influential both to the New Left and to European political theologians. In The Principle of Hope, Bloch can consider cultural forms like art, music, and religion as repositories of both hope and future potentials waiting to be expressed. For Peter Thompson, I quote, "The utopian dimension in Bloch is an attempt to claim back for humanity that which they have ceded to the Holy Spirit without denying the value of the spiritual." Bloch saw religion as a product of human activity containing immense emancipatory potential. And in so doing, he suggested that human beings are not already made, but are incomplete, unfulfilled, and in constant process of attainment. Bloch did not try to dismiss religion as false consciousness, but realized that it contains an embedded hope. Although for Bloch the not yet was a dynamic and an open-ended process, for Gutierrez it was the contemporary Latin American revolutionary experience that made utopian thought viable. Gutierrez elaborated on what he called three elements of utopia: its relationships to historical reality, its verification in praxis, and its rational aspects. This latter part directly responded to claims that utopians were irrational or unrealistic. He argued that utopia's relationship to historical reality is neither simple nor static. It appears under two aspects that are mutually necessary and make for a complex and dynamic relationship: denunciation and annunciation. The act of denunciation of injustice and annunciation of a better future required a form of praxis. Gutierrez present, it is an evasion of reality, end quote. Thus, only concrete actions in the present could lead to social, economic, and political liberation, the kind embodied in Che's New Man, Camilo Torres' Integral Man, that is, body and soul, spirit and matter, human, economic, social. Gutierrez's emphasis on the relationship between utopia, history, and liberation influenced how Christians foresaw socialism and navigated Marxist Christian rapprochement during the 70s. For leaders of the movement, salvation and social conflicts such as class struggle only occur in history, accentuating in the process the importance of politics. Giulio Girardi, an Italian theologian and members of the movement in Italy and Chile, in his talk during the 5th International Week of Theology, expounded on the issue of class struggle for the church. He questioned the traditional religious paradigm that God created both men and nature, and that the evils of the world were simply the result of God's will. For Girardi, this view seems to suggest that since man has already been made, there is not much to be done in the world to alter the conditions that structure his life. Class struggle, according to this view then, becomes unnatural, and it tends to disturb the order of things. Girardi criticized this as, quote, a Christian doctrinal conception of reality as static, fixed, and hierarchical, end quote. By recognizing that class struggle was an undeniable part of Latin American social upheavals of the period, the CPS questioned the notion of the unity in the Catholic Church. During a meeting, Coronel, in the south of the country, showing the creative convergence between Christians and Marxists, Girardi reassured the miners of the area that their Christian upbringing and their Marxist-inspired political organizing were not in conflict with each other. On the contrary, he recognized the value of Marxism as, quote, mobilizing doctrine. He also acknowledged that the increased everyday interactions between and among Christians and Marxists in Chile could no longer be avoided. He suggested that conversations such as the ones that were taking place in Coronel had to occur with workers, otherwise their intellectual work would be rendered useless. Quote, it could fill books, but it could not fill our life, he argued. Girardi also explained that the traditional view on the relationship between Marxism and Christianity had contributed to mischaracterizing both. As Bloch had done earlier, Girardi insisted that one must not try to dissociate the ideology of Marxism from its socio-analytical elements. Instead, he argued, we must consider on the one hand Christianity as a dynamic reality, a dynamic way of living, and Marxism, on the other hand, also as the dynamic system, as a system which cannot be considered complete but rather in motion. He even went as far as to say that one could not engage in dialogue with dogmatic Marxists, and that a strictly rigid interpretation of Marx was not Marxism. For him, the relationship between Marxism and Christian faith had to be creative, much like Bloch's. Only by seeing both of them, both Marxism and Christianity, as open and dynamic, could faith assume its force of contestation and transformation of the world, that is, its utopian dimension. The secretary of the movement, the Jesuit Gonzalo Arroyo, expressed similar views on the critical relationship between both. He emphasized that a Christian way of life changed with the experience of being in the shantytowns and interacting closely with workers. There exists, he argued, quote, a certain fraternity which anticipates the solidarity we seek for all, which is the anticipation of the kingdom of Christ, in which there will be truly effective love for others, in which there will be justice for all, in which there will be true peace. This notion of a present that already anticipates the future, or of a future that is already somewhat imminent in the present, shows Bloch's utopian influence. Like Bloch, the documents, the final ones that resulted from the Latin American encounter of Christians for socialism, expresses the notion that faith can have critical creative elements. The Christian committed to a revolutionary praxis discovers the liberating force of the love of God, of the death and the resurrection of Christ. He discovers that his faith is not the acceptance of a world already made and of a history already predetermined, but that his faith is the creative existence of a new and fraternal world, a historical initiative fertilized by Christian hope. The kind of utopianism embedded in the quote is certainly non-teleological. In Que Hacer, Diego Irarrázaval, a member of the movement, framed concientización along the same lines, a dialectic between the present and the future, that is to say, as an eschatological force. But he debates about the precise role of Christians in how to concretely build socialism became ever more divisive over time. As political polarization and right-wing sabotage of Allende deepened after his first year in office, the question of partisan affiliation became increasingly heated. Just to give you one example, the Spanish priest Ignacio Pujadas formed the Comunidad de Cristianos Revolucionarios, or evolutionary Christian community in Viña del Mar. And unlike other kinds of base communities, it was not open to all. It required acceptance by members and a revolutionary form discipline. The community declared that if members could not prioritize those meetings, their monthly ones, and other required activities, a tribunal could ultimately decide to expel them from the community. He referenced Che and Camilo Torres and mandated strict acceptance of the principles, claiming that, quote, only revolutionary discipline can lead us to revolutionary morality. Only revolutionary morality can lead us to revolutionary Christianity. Not all the members and allies of the group shared the dogmatic view of what liberation entailed, but these differences show the diversive ways in which the members of CPS conceived of Christian salvation and historical liberation to produce competing models of engagement with socialism. To conclude, I'd just like to highlight that the studies of this movement have often overlooked the ways in which their members' utopian thinking transformed the conventional notions of both Marxism and Christianity. Such thinking allowed the group to navigate uncharted epistemological territory as it sought to undo the hold of dogmatic perspectives that so influenced the Latin American left of the 60s and the 70s. In so doing, CPS pointed the way forward for a dynamic and creative convergence between the two most important forces of 20th century social movements, Marxism and Christianity. The utopian impulse is reflected in the intellectual and theological work of many of the members. And although the coup d'etat temporarily foreclosed the utopian horizon, the desire for a future free of exploitation guided the activities of the members in exile and within Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship. Thank you.
Bueno, hemos concluido la presentación de los premios. Felicitaciones a todas las mujeres que ganaron. Creo que hay que visibilizar que fueron mujeres quienes se llevaron los primeros premios. Y muchísimas gracias a quienes nos acompañaron presencial y virtualmente y seguimos en el Congreso. Gracias.